Okie dokie, let's get going. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving up your Wednesday evenings to be with us. We are hoping to condense down everything that you might want to know about starting your locum careers and locuming as an F3 into the next 90 minutes or so. I'm just going to give a quick overview of what we're going to cover, and then we'll do some quick intros and then we can get started. These are the main questions that came up when we did some polls on Facebook and from the questions that we've seen asked to us at Messley quite frequently about locuming, covering from getting started through pay, finding work, working with agencies, rights, career development, all the way through. So for each of these sections, what we'll do is I'll speak for a couple of minutes and share some general points, and then we'll jump into a Q&A, getting some insights from Ryan and Abra on their experiences, both as doctors and working with Messley, but also answer any questions you have. You will see on the right-hand side, if you're on a computer, and down in the bottom corner, if you're on your mobile, a little chat symbol. If you drop a message in there, that message comes just to us, not to everyone else. Ask whatever you like. We'll try and answer as many of them as we can, and we'll try and stick to roughly to this agenda to keep the structure. But yeah, please ask whatever's on your mind. If there's something that we don't get to, maybe we'll try and pick it up at the end, and we'll try and do all that in 90 minutes. So some quick introductions. Ryan, do you want to go first?
Hey, yeah. So I'm Ryan. I did my F1 and F2 at Basildon, and then I did an F3 around the same area before joining Messley in my F4 year, actually. So I mainly locumed in A&E and TNO, but now, if you've ever read our blogs, that's probably me, and I do a fair bit of the marketing here now, so yeah.
Good stuff. Abra?
Good evening, everyone. Fantastic to see so many of you here this evening. I'm Abra. I'm one of the founders of Messley, and my clinical background is actually as an anaesthetics registrar. So I did my foundation program in Northwest Thames back in 2011 to 2013, and then took an F3 year in 2013. So it was one of the first cohorts to do so. So I did a 6-month clinical fellowship at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital doing critical care. Then I spent 6 months traveling, doing some locum work and going around Australia and New Zealand. I then went on to do my core anaesthetics training in Northwest London. And in 2016, I took another break and joined the NHS Clinical Entrepreneurs Programme to start Messley, for which I'm doing full-time at the moment. So in terms of my role at Messley, I look after the product development and the app development. So everything you've used on the website, on the app is under my remit. So if you have any questions about the app or how to use it, obviously drop us a question, or if there's anything about my clinical experience that sounds interesting to you, then again, just drop a message in the chat. I'll be happy to answer.
Good stuff. And I'm Chris. I don't have a clinical background, actually, but I happen to be Abra's best mate, which means I've been hearing about the ups and downs and the challenges of being a junior doctor for a while. And since 2016, I've been working with him on Messley. So I've spoken to probably thousands of doctors now about careers and career choices and locuming specifically. So whilst I don't have first-hand experience, I feel like I've heard lots of stories, and so I hope I can guide an interesting conversation for you today. So without further ado, how do I get started? So obviously a really exciting time for you guys at the moment. From August, I think you're going to have obviously a big change in your work and how you work, but also a really rewarding time. I think you'll find it's the first time where you've had the freedom and flexibility in your work and the ability to tailor work around your life rather than your life having to fit in the gaps in your work. Which is super exciting, and I think all the benefits of locuming are well known, the financial benefits, but also the freedom and choice of work as well. But but I'm sure there is a daunting element to this as well. How does it work? And then how do I get started? The common theme that we've seen with doctors is those that have a really clear plan for what they want to do in their F3 year and what they want to get out of locuming tend to be the most successful. So we're always quite encouraging of doctors to make an action plan for their time as a locum to help them get some goals and have some structure around what they do, set some guide rails for what might happen. So these are some of the questions that we would recommend considering, and now's a good time to do it. You've still got 3 months or so, just a little under 3 months until you finish your F2. A lot of these are obvious, but we've been surprised, I think, of how sometimes how little thought has gone into some of these. So which specialties do you want to work in? That might just be one. It could be a couple. We'll talk in a bit about which specialties tend to have more work for locums, to give you some guidance on that. What rotas would you be happy with? Would you do nights or not? Do you ever do weekends? Are you flexible? Would you be willing to travel, or is there quite a fixed travel area that you want to work in? Financially, how much do you want to earn? It's quite common for people to try and maybe save a deposit for a house in their F3 year. What's your financial goal? That can inform some decisions around what work you take. What do you want to learn clinically? Do you have a training application, a firm training application in mind, in which case you're gearing towards that? Or are you more trying to explore different areas and different specialties? And outside of work, do you have other passions that you're looking to follow, and therefore your locum work has to make space for that? And then reflecting back, which of these are most important, which are non-negotiable? And I think just putting some research in to answer some of these questions and some thinking, and hopefully today we can give you some insight that will help with that. I think you'll find a really useful and beneficial exercise. So Ryan, just coming to you, I'd be really interested for you to give us some reflections back on your F3 year. What were your non-negotiables coming into it? What were the main things that you were focused on?
Well, I think there's probably like two main ones and one secondary one, which is, firstly, I hated night shifts. I like the clinical aspect of it, but I hate what they did to my body. I would go 72 hours without any sleep following it just because I could not adjust. So I made a vow never to do a single one when I went to my F3 year, and thankfully never had to. Weekends were one thing that I wasn't a massive fan of, but I didn't mind doing it if I had to, but I would have preferred not to. So that was the second one. A last one was also distance. So I would limit myself to about a 40-minute travel, either driving or by public transport. And living in Essex at the moment, it's doable. I mean, I can get from where I am now to pretty much the entirety of mid-South Essex, or even Dartford and Grangemouth. So like, it wasn't too bad. And yeah, so those were the ones that I didn't want to do, with night shifts and distance being the ones that I was definite no-nos.
Yeah, and we'll talk about pay in a section in a second, but these things are all sort of in balance. So if you have quite ambitious earning or savings goals, it's good to be more flexible around these other things. You might get higher rates if you're prepared to travel, obviously, and or higher rates for doing night shifts, which is why I think it's important to just look at all of these things in combination. You might not be able to get the best outcome in all of these areas. So that's why we say what's non-negotiable, what won't you compromise on? Maybe there are other areas where you will. So some people would travel quite far and go and live in hospital accommodation for 6 weeks because the rates might be really, really high, and that's something that they're happy to do because their savings goals are important. So you guys get the gist. I think it's just a useful planning exercise. Okay, moving on. So the first question on that list was, what specialties do you want to work in? We get asked a lot about this. Where's the work? Where should I be looking? the good news, I would say, and the reason for everyone here to be very optimistic is that we're expecting there to be a tremendous amount of locum work available from August. Perhaps it's hard to say, but perhaps the most there's ever been. That's because more F2s than ever are taking F3 years. A lot of the current F3s are taking F4 years. And so there's an expectation that there'll be a lot of rota gaps and therefore lots of locum work. So you should feel confident that there'll be a lot of work available for you, but there isn't work in every specialty for SHOs, not in abundance anyway. So what we've done is done a breakdown here of all of the SHO locum jobs that were posted to Messley in 2021. So that's offered by agencies to doctors that were looking for locum work. About 25,000, just over 25,000 in total throughout the year. So a very large nationally representative data set. And you can see that the ones that we've boxed in red at the bottom, those 5 account for about 70 to 75% of the total. And they're the ones you'd expect: Gen Med, A&E, Acute Med, General Surgery, General Psych. That's where the bulk of the work is. If you're looking to fill a full-time or near full-time rota with locum work, I would expect you would be picking up some work in these specialties, or it would at least help your chances if you were willing to do that. And obviously, you can do it. You can do it in combination with others. You'll see that there are some specialties not on this list. There are a number. Dermatology is a good example where F3s will join Messley looking for locum work in that specialty, and it's quite rare. You can see there's a bunch here that you might think are missing from this list. They're missing because they were posted very, very infrequently. Infectious disease is another one we get asked about a lot. If that's something where you're really keen to find work, the best bet is probably to consider a fellowship. If that's really high on your agenda, maybe speak to your bank where you're currently working, or to the rota coordinators or consultants in the relevant department, see whether they might have any opportunities. That's typically better than other options, because those opportunities are less frequently available. Ryan, it'd be good to get some insight from you on the specialties that you locumed in, and why.
Okay, so towards, I guess, F1 and F2, I was gearing up towards going into basically CST. I was very surgically inclined and just wanted to do lots of surgical locum work. Unfortunately, where I only wanted to work 3 days a week, finding a ward-based job and just not being an on-call monkey was a bit difficult. So after trying for a little while, it was just a lot easier to pick up A&E shifts. So even though I wanted to do TNO, I found that A&E was just a lot easier. The work wasn't too bad. You can go home and not have to think about patients or bring them back with you, essentially. And if you want to work on an ad hoc basis, even if it's like once a week or twice a week, or even less, it's just easier to pick up. Whereas if you're waiting for something like a psych placement or a TNO placement where you only want to do 1 to 3 days, agents or even the banks, like it's very hard to fill. So it just takes a lot of time and a lot of waiting doing nothing. So if you are going to be working in a specialty that's a bit niche, you need to give yourself a lot of time and planning to get those in. And if you want to just pick up ad hoc shifts, then I think A&E is like the perfect way to go. And there's always shifts everywhere. So in my trust at the moment, I could pick up anything. Like I could pick up something tomorrow, like for probably not core hours, but finishing before 9. So it's
Yeah, that's a good point actually about the interrelation of all the different factors that we talked about. So if you do choose A&E, there's so much work that you'll have to travel less, and you probably won't need to do nights. If there's another specialty that's maybe higher up on this list, say gastro, where there's much less work, you might have to travel. We've had two questions along the same lines. Can you locum in a specialty you haven't worked in before, e.g. psych? Can you get A&E F3 jobs if you've not had a rotation in A&E? The answer is definitely yes. It's quite common. It's actually, I'd say, one of the benefits of being a locum is that you can try out shifts in other specialties that you haven't worked in before.
Except GP.
Except GP. Yeah, I've just seen that. No, you're not allowed to locum as a GP. You have to be working in GP training or a qualified GP for liability reasons, I believe. But outside of GP, yeah, you can. One thing I would say, whilst there's an abundance of work, it is still competitive, especially in the best places to work. And your CV will be less competitive in psych if you haven't done a psych rotation. You don't have those competencies you can put on your CV. You don't have a reference from a psych consultant. That doesn't mean it's impossible, and the fact that there's so much work out there is really to your advantage. But it might require you to be a little bit more patient or a little bit more flexible at the outset. And look, once you've done a few blocks of, in this case, psych shifts, that kind of problem goes away, and you can say you're an experienced psychiatry SHO locum, and then be more picky, maybe command a higher rate, etc. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of the lay of the land in terms of specialties. There's some good questions there. It is still worth doing some taster days. I think that can't help. If those are available, I would definitely pick up a taster day or two. It's just something to obviously fill a small gap on your CV. In terms of regions, we haven't done a regional breakdown. There's work in all regions in abundance. So if you're worried about picking up work in a particular part of the country, I wouldn't be. Okay, pay. Obviously a juicy topic, and not just. We'll try and give you some insight, not just into the raw numbers, but also how pay works and why it fluctuates and goes up and down, so you can have hopefully have a good understanding of that. Give quite a wide range here, and you might know this already, but £36 per hour is the bottom end, 50 and maybe a little bit more at the top end per hour. And I'll just try and explain why there's such a range. We've got some factors there on the screen for things that push the rate up and things that push the rate down. They all come back basically to supply and demand and competitiveness, which is probably quite obvious. Rates go up when the department's desperate, and they really need people. They'll try and encourage people with a higher rate. Rates are higher for non-core hours, nights and weekends. Short notice, again, they put the rate up because they need people at short notice. So that might be if another locum is cancelled, or if they've suddenly someone's fallen ill on the rota, for example. You can also command a higher rate if your CV stands out, and maybe we'll talk to Abra about that in a second. But having a well-tailored CV can really help you command a higher rate, and talk about negotiation of pay in a second. Rates are lower. Basically, the flip side of that, London is a big issue, and we'll talk about London on the next page. But if you want long-term bookings, booked in advance in hospitals where there's lots of doctors interested, the pay is lower. If a trust might have very strict protocols around pay, so they just refuse to pay, they'd rather go, and some are a little unreasonable. Let's say they'd rather see an understaffed department than pay a little bit more. That happens from time to time. The thing to bear in mind is that these factors are volatile, so they change a lot. They change month to month or even week to week within one department. So you might hear sometimes someone else say, "Oh, I did a job there and I got £48 an hour," and you think, "Damn, why did I only get 44?" That could be due to the factors at that time. It's not necessarily because you got ripped off. So obviously you should be savvy, and you should try and get the maximum pay you can. But just trying to get you just trying to make you aware of how that works. Ryan, do you mind sharing your sort of experiences on pay and what you managed to command when you were locuming?
Okay, so initially when I first started, I just did a little quick research on what the average was, and in my hospital, after talking to colleagues there as well as a few friends working in nearby places, the rate was about 45 an hour. So that's just what I told my locum agent that I wanted essentially, and I got a bunch of shifts at that rate. After I got a bit more experience and I noticed that some of the other SHOs were on 50 an hour, I thought it's about time to try and be a bit cheeky and ask for that. And but yeah, thankfully no resistance. But I think with that, it's quite helpful if you're known in the department already, you've worked a while there. So when the agent then tries to then speak to the roads coordinator who has to get approved by a consultant sometimes for like higher rates, like if they know you, they're usually quite happy to pay you, providing like obviously you've got a decent reputation there. Occasionally, I don't want to make this seem like it's a common thing. It's really not. It's very rare. But occasionally when it's like escalated rates, you can sometimes hit 60, 67 if for some reason you've been asked to step up to a reg post, but I exercise that with caution. And I think, I'm not sure if we're going to be talking too much about it later, but there are sometimes room to work for a lot higher pay, especially when you're jumping up a level. So if you, as an SHO, if you've been working for a while, more so in your F4 year, if you've passed a few exams, then the consultants might ask you to essentially, work as a reg if they're short-staffed. And I think careful on this, just because.
Yeah, we just had a question on that. What's how high do the rates commonly go? I'd say low 50s is common, and as in it's I'd say we see that fairly regularly. You will hear stories of 60, 65, 70. That's worth bearing in mind. That's probably quite an undesirable place to work if they're having to, they would rather pay 40 than 70 if they could get away with it. It's probably quite short notice. So maybe the clinical responsibilities are a bit extended. So
the vast majority of my shifts were between 45 and 50 pounds.
So. Then we just had a question come in that I think you touched on, Ryan. Competition for posts. Do you get interviewed, or is it done solely off your CV or profile? I think it's quite rare to get an interview before a locum job. So it is based off your CV, and what you said, Ryan, off your performance in the department. So if you fit in really well and they like you and your work is good and you kind of hit the ground running, you're more likely to be extended again and again. That's when you potentially can command a higher rate. That said, the CV is important. I just want to bring Abrar in. Do you want to share a few thoughts on what should go onto a CV to make it stand out from the competition?
Yeah, of course. I think the best advice I could give everyone is just make sure that you tailor your CV for your F3 and for locum work. So many of you already have a CV from applying for training posts or even for applying for clinical fellowships. Your CV for locuming F3 is slightly different because what you're essentially trying to convey in that CV is that you're competent to do the role. So you'll have either the head of the department, so you have the ED consultant or med consultant looking over your CV, and you need to convey to them as quickly as possible that you're competent to do that role. So I'd say your focus has to be more on the skills and the competencies that you've gained during your foundation program, as opposed to some of the broader things that you might have done for your foundation program, like audits and publications. That's less relevant. I think from my personal example is that I was actually interested in doing critical care and ITU locums when I was F3, which is actually quite an unusual one. So I really need to make my CV stand out. Because I'd done a clinical fellowship, I was able to put on my CV that had the experience of doing a few central lines. I'd done ABGs, I'd assessed intubated patients. And I think that really, really helped me stand out for that particular specialty. So it's really worth thinking about, going back to your action plan, what specialties you want to locuming and what skills I can demonstrate for that. And I'd go even further to say that it actually might be worth tailoring it to be specialty specific. So if you know that you're applying for an A&E role, then make sure you've got an A&E CV. If you're looking at applying for a psychiatry role, have a psychiatry CV as well. I'd say just a couple of small pointers as well. Just just make sure that, the small things like the formatting, spelling, the layout is just really clean, and really try to keep it brief as well. You're not going to have someone that's going to spend, hours poring over your CV. It's going to be, maybe 5 minutes looking over it. They want to get that kind of, that core information as quickly as possible. So, as Chris said, it really can make a difference in this setting in terms of how much you can command, particularly as you gather more experience as a locum doctor. It can be the difference between, being at the bottom tier, the sort of 36 to 40, and the top tier, 45 to 50, if you can convey that in your CV really, really succinctly.
Yeah, we've had 4 or 5 people ask the same question, which is, do you have an example CV or a template? Yeah, we do. We're working on that at the moment. That'll be one of the next things that we publish. So it'll be a template that you can follow with some examples. It's a bit overdue, actually. We'll publish that on the blog and make sure you guys see it. And hopefully find that.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and just say we do have an article on our blog, which I'll just paste in now, that talks through a CV for your F3 year. So we'll send that over as well.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. Yeah, that doesn't have any example, but it talks you through, and actually covers fellowships as well as locum in 2 different sections. So yeah, we'll send that around afterwards. Actually, we'll make sure that's covered off. Okay, so that's an idea of rates. I mentioned London. There is unfortunately something called pan-London rates that you might have heard people talk about, which is basically a cartel, unfortunately a legal one, where the hospital, roughly within the M25 boundary, so it's definitely Greater London, have agreed to rates that are fixed, that they very rarely budge from. Pan-London rates, £36 and change for core hours, and 43 and a bit for non-core antisocial hours. So you're aware of the lingo. They're called break glass rules, or break glass provisions when they go over that, but the trust have to fill in all sorts of justifying paperwork when they do that, so they don't like doing it. It's unfortunately the decision that the NHS has taken. They've been in place for maybe 3 years now, I think. The common ways around it, unless you want to work lots of antisocial hours, which I don't think is a good solution, is just to travel outside the M25. If you're in South London, that could be down to Surrey, Kent, out to Essex, up to sort of that Luton, Milton Keynes type area in the north, where you can work at normal rates, which can be substantially more. It's frustrating. I would say don't get irritated with an agency or a bank when they tell you that all I can get you is £36 an hour. That's kind of out of their hands. I'm sure they make their lives easier if the rates were higher, but that's what's been decided. So those are London rates. The next thing on pay was, we just wanted to put some of this in context, because what does it mean, £40 an hour? What am I actually going to have in my pocket? At the end of the month, at the end of the year. So we've asked 2 questions. This actually comes from the calculator that we've built, that uses some of the rates information that we've collected. And we think this is quite interesting. So first question: if I want to match my F2 income, how many shifts a week would I have to work? It's actually amazing. It's only 2 shifts a week, roughly. If you're getting normal locum pay, that ends up being a gross salary. So gross means before any tax, pensions, student loans been taken out. As you can see on the right, £40,000 a year, which will be similar to, depending on where you're working, similar to what you're getting at the moment, just from 2 shifts a week. And then out of that, you see it's £3,700 a month. You pay tax, national insurance, etc. You'll end up with, it's usually something like 2/3 or a little more of that will be what you end up taking home. So that's interesting. And I think when people make their action plans, they might say that I'm not super financially motivated. I just want to keep the same income and have lots of flexibility. If that's you, 2 shifts a week, and you've got 3 shifts a week, 5 days a week to do whatever you like. If you want to just maximize the pay and say, okay, I'm going to work full time as a locum, it's actually amazing, over 6 figures, so over £100,000 a year. Again, the gross amount, so that's before you've had tax and other deductions taken out. That's 5 shifts a week. You can see on the calculator the methodology, but it's mostly core hours with a few antisocial hours thrown in, something that we think is reasonable. So yeah, hopefully that makes you excited about the potential benefits of locuming, whether you want flexibility in the first case or financial benefits in the second. We're going to talk about payslips a bit later on. I've got a couple of questions about pensions and student loan, so I'll mark those and come back to those later. I'll just finish up on pay. Tips for increasing your locum rate. So see if you I think we would all like to maximize our pay where we can. Some 4 good tips I think that you should bear in mind. Focus on high paying rotas, regions and specialties, so moving around to go where the good shifts, the well paying shifts are. That's obvious. Paired with that, I think registering with multiple agencies and banks, I should add, and we'll talk about banks and agencies next, really helps. The more avenues you have to finding work, the better. The more options you have, and therefore the more likely it is that you'll find something that pays better. So people make what I think is a really silly mistake of picking one agency, sometimes at random even, and then just getting what they're given from that one agency, which could be a lot less than they could be getting elsewhere. So having a bit of competition and a few different options really helps. We talked about a CV, and then knowing your worth and being prepared to negotiate, and that might be something that you need to build your confidence in as you go through your F3 year. But like Ryan explained, saying, well, actually, I think I'm worth this. When you've worked in a department for a while, or you want to be extended, or when you've got a few months of locum experience onto your CV and your CV's improved, I think that's definitely something you can do. And the senior doctors that have been locuming for a while are sort of expert at this. Some, to be honest, I think take it too far and try and hold hospitals to ransom. But I'll definitely say that at the F3 level, it's an underutilized skill, and people are afraid to ask and think that they might come across as greedy. But you're providing a really valuable service to the NHS, and you deserve to be well paid for it. So it is okay to negotiate. We've actually written a blog on negotiation tips and how to actually do that, depending on if you're working with a bank or an agency. So yeah, that's definitely one to check out. Okay, so I think that's a good summary of pay. I hope that's given people a good overview of how that works. We've had some good questions about competition and CVs. Finding shifts. Obviously, this is pretty important as a locum. You might be worried about not being able to find shifts and going homeless, or at least struggling to make ends meet. So we'll try and give you a good primer on how it works, where you'll find shifts, and how to go about it, so that those worries fade away. Just a quick intro. So there's basically 2 ways in summary: staff banks and agencies. I'm sure you know about both, but just to very briefly summarize, staff bank is the pool of doctors that are registered to work with that trust. It allows you to work in that trust only. Typically, it's run by medical staffing, and you liaise with medical staffing to book in shifts. They might have a booking app like Locum's Nest or Patchwork or others. They might use email, but it's you working directly with the hospital. On the other side, the locum agency is a bit different. That's a company that specializes in helping doctors find locum work and helping hospitals find find doctors to fill their vacancies. So they're a middleman, like an estate agent would help you buy or sell a house, and they specialise in that, and they help you find work across a number of hospitals once you're registered with them. So we get asked a lot, which is better, which we'll talk through now. The good answer is you can have your cake and eat it. So you can work through both with some caveats, which we'll explain as well. But in summary, banks are good if there's a particular hospital, particular trust you want to work at. You can get registered with that bank. It's really simple. Particularly if the bank is well organized. So there's massive variability in the quality, let's say, or organization of different staff banks. Some are really slick operations. The people in medical staffing are good. It's easy to get registered. It's easy to find work. I would say those are in the minority. There is a vast majority that are pretty poorly organized. They don't get back to you. The shifts come out very sporadically. That can be quite challenging. So it's worth doing. If there is a particular hospital you want to work at, it might be where you're currently doing your F2. It'd be worth making some inquiries about that. The bank tend to just publish all their shifts in one go, and everybody just sort of piles in and takes what they can get. So it ends up being a bit piecemeal. It can be quite tricky to get long blocks of shifts. So if you're just working through the bank, that can happen. If you're well known there, they might keep some shifts aside just for you. There's always a negotiation with these things. But that's one thing to bear in mind. And obviously you're negotiating and dealing directly with the trust. Agencies, see different, working with one agency allows you to work with all the hospitals that they work with. So you only do one registration process and you can move around the whole region or around the country if you want. Obviously they help very much if the banks are disorganized and much better options. They can be better for long-term booking. So a trust will work with the agency specifically to fill a rota gap. So they'll have long block bookings, which really helps. Ryan, do you want to talk a bit about your bank experience and just flesh that out? Because I think that would be interesting for people to hear, and then we'll answer some of the questions that have just come in.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of bank, I guess for me, I signed up a little bit late. So just to add on to this, if you sign up whilst you're in F2, the process is really quick. It's an internal application. But if you sign up externally, so after I think about 6 weeks has passed, it takes a long time. So get it done ASAP if you want to actually be working regularly. But once you're signed up, the bank that I work at is actually really good. Everything's like clockwork. So shifts get released on Sundays once a month at the exact same time, and so you know when basically they're going to come out and you can start booking them. The only problem with being in a very well organized bank is that everyone knows when the shifts are coming out. So I'm assuming there will be quite a few people waiting for that moment, and then within 20-30 minutes of shifts being released, all the core hours are gone, and you're left with, if you're like 2 hours late, with later shifts, weekends, nights. So it has the advantages and also has a bit of problems there. For me in A&E, it's not usually too much of an issue, but there have been times where I've been left with just shifts that finish after 9 o'clock, and it's not the most ideal for me, but I don't mind too much because I could book it quite the day before sometimes. But if you want to have regular shifts and core hours, you do need to be properly on it and essentially just remember the time and book it as soon as.
I think probably the most important factor in all these is the bank itself. So yeah, doing some inquiries there about the specific hospital you want to work at can be helpful. And if everybody working there is working through an agency, that that tells its own story. Let me just answer some of the questions that have come in, because there's lots of good ones. Can I work? Can you be on both a locum bank for a hospital and do shifts there through an agency at the same time? No, you can't. that'll upset the bank and the agency. You kind of have to choose as regards one particular place where you work. So there's a bit of a cautionary tale about joining banks, because if you join the bank and start registering with them, the agencies won't be able to place you there. So you've kind of committed to working with that particular bank and not with an agency. But generally speaking, you should, I would recommend picking, if there's places you know you want to work and you're happy that the banks are good, pick a couple of those and get registered there, and then work with agencies for the rest. And then you have, as we said before, multiple avenues for finding work, which is going to just give you more choice and pay off in the long run. I'm planning to move areas. Where can I find contact details of the staff bank? There isn't a good source for that. It gets asked a lot on Facebook. If you go in the F3 group, which we moderate on Facebook, that question comes up a lot. You can search. Someone will have asked for it before, and if not, you can ask again. Then there's a few questions about induction and IT, which we'll come back to later. Those are good questions, but we're going to talk about sort of getting started and getting settled in a bit later. There's a question about references, which we'll also come on to later, if that's okay. And then do banks pay more? They should, as they're not having to pay agency fees. Not always. I'd say the pay across the board is probably pretty similar. You'll find instances where agencies pay more and instances where banks pay more. If there's an agency not involved, you're right, the trust will save money on those fees, but they will also incur their own costs, because they have to register you, get you compliant, and they have to have staff on hand to book you in and manage your timesheets, etc., which is all outsourced to the agency and covered by their fee. So it's kind of 6 of one and half dozen of the other. Obviously, as you know, Mestley works with agencies. We did our own research before we decided to do that, and we were quite comfortable that the NHS has put quite a lot of focus on stopping agencies charging ridiculous fees, which used to happen quite regularly. They basically rip the NHS off. Again, that hold them to ransom. That's not the case anymore. The rates they're allowed to charge has come down. It's well controlled, and so that's why the cost of agency or bank is is quite similar. Okay. There are some other good questions that we'll come back to, but I'm going to move on for now and talk a little bit about what makes a good agency. There are good and bad ones for sure. Ryan's got some good war stories, which we'll share in a second, and some battle scars, let's say. But generally speaking, a good agency is one that has good reputations with the hospitals they work with, which means if they have a CV to share, the hospital is excited about that because they know they have a good rep. They have good access to shifts, so they're on the frameworks, which is where the shifts are distributed, so they can get you good access to work. The recruiters are experts, so often in the good agencies and the ones we work with at Mestley, they'll have recruiters that are either specialty specialists, so they'll only work in A&E or surgery, for example, and so they know that world really well, or they work in a particular area, and so they know that part of the country really well. They know all the hospitals, often know the rota coordinators or the consultants in those departments, and they've got a kind of a good access in there, and they can give you a really good overview of your options. Come back to the estate agent point. You want someone that knows the local area, right? Knows what the going rate is for rents and house prices, and can explain all of that to you well. And the good agencies have those people working for them. And a good agency should have a good registration process, obviously. Okay, Abra, do you want to talk a little bit about the agencies on Mestley and our process for choosing those and how that works? Give people some confidence.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I've just seen a few questions come in about that. So yeah, in short, all the agencies on Messi have been approved by us. And when we started Messi, we went through a process of the discovery process of basically trying to find who the best agencies are. And we did that through a number of different ways. We spoke to a number of doctors who have worked for these agencies, ran a bunch of polls, done a couple of sort of secret shoppers where we sort of signed up with the agencies ourselves. With regards to the work, we actually submitted a bunch of freedom of information requests to NHS Trust to actually get an idea of who actually has the work at the hospitals, because you hear every agency saying, oh, we've got work here or got work here, but actually we looked at the data and said, okay, who actually has work in London, who actually has work in Yorkshire, who actually has work in the Northwest, etc. So we've kind of narrowed it down to, you know, a short list of who we think the best agencies are. And I guess when you come onto Messi, it's kind of like compare the market. So we'll give you access to all of these agencies, and you know, they've all been approved by ours, and it's up to you to decide, you know, which one you want to work with. But you know, we'd say that they're all great, and you know, if they're offering you work in the region that you're looking for, then they're certainly worth considering.
Yeah, there's a few questions here about basically about changing your mind or switching. Yeah, you can. If you start registering with an agency and you don't think that they're giving you what they promised, or that the registration process is unduly arduous, yeah, you can just stop that process, tell them you don't want to continue anymore, tell them that you'd like them to delete all of your data. That's perfectly fine. Yeah, you can register with more than one agency at the same time, like I mentioned. That's fine. Someone's asked, can I do bank in one specialty, an agency for another? Yeah, you can. Not at the same hospital, like I said, but yeah, that's really common. And I think the right mindset here is to remember that you're going to effectively become a freelancer, a contractor. You don't have an employer anymore, and so it's up to you to go and hunt for your own work. The more avenues you have for that, the better. The more proactive you are about that, the better. So yeah, register with a couple of agencies, sure. And you know, if it's not working out for you, tell them so, and go elsewhere. Okay, if you've done locum shifts at your hospital during F2, does that mean you're signed up to the bank? Not if you're there as an employee, but like Ryan said, it's typically a 1-page or 2-page form. They obviously have all of your details already, so it's not too arduous, and it's a good idea to do that whilst you're there. Once you leave, it can become a little bit more complicated. Okay, there's a few questions about fees, which I think it'd be good to answer now. Do agencies take a cut of your pay? No, so they will add a small fee, which is a few pounds for an SHO, is a few pounds an hour, on top of your fees, so separately, and they'll charge the hospital for both separately. Like I said, that additional fee they charge covers the cost of finding the doctor, obviously, doing all the compliance that the hospital doesn't have to do, doing all the liaising and the booking in, sorting out the pay and the timesheets, which takes it off the hospital's hands, which is why that works. If you are on a bank and you want to leave and work via an agency, that is possible. There's a process called cooling off, which is different from trust to trust, but there's usually like a 6-week period where you have to stop working for the bank, and then you can come back with an agency. What I would recommend you do, it's actually on your Mesli profile, is saying which banks you're registered with. Just being honest with that, with the agency, explain what the situation is. They'd love to know that. Explain that you want to work with them or an agency rather than with the bank. That they'll appreciate that. They'll then liaise with the trust and try and make that happen for you, and explain explain what the situation is. Okay. Maybe we'll come back to a couple of questions about registration and the compliance process in a sec. There is one about when do our Mesli profiles become live? Is that when we can see the agencies that you recommend? Yeah, that's a good question. So that's happening at the moment. We're doing it in batches so that everybody gets a good experience and gets looked after by the agencies. That started to happen just from the day before yesterday. So you'll be contacted over the next few weeks, letting you know that your profile can become live and asking you to confirm that. And then you'll see two things. One is jobs that have been added by agencies for August for you to browse with our information, like the ratings of the recruiters that are working there and other information. And you'll also get messages from certain recruiters from the agencies that we work with saying, effectively, I've looked at your profile. This is, excuse me, this is the work that I can get you, giving you some information about pay, etc., for you to review. If you think that, based on the information you've provided, it'd be worth a call, you can speak to them, ask them to provide some more information. Then it's up to you whether you take it from there. You don't register. Like Abra said, Mesli is like compare the market. So we'll help you. You register with us and we'll help you see what's out there. Our job is to help you see which the good agencies for you might be based on your criteria. You then speak to those agencies and start the process of speaking to them and registering with them. So we handle the introductions, let's say. That happens through us. Once you've had that connection, you then speak to the recruiter and take it from there. It's not necessary to go to a bunch of websites of the different recruiters and try and register there as well. That just overlaps and causes a bit of confusion.
We also help with the registration process. So if you are looking to register with a few agencies, we do have a feature where you can upload and store and share all your core documents on Mesli. So it's kind of designed for, being able to, to work with 2 or 3 different agencies and help you save time there as well.
Yeah, and we've just had a question about rates. Yeah, all the jobs that are advertised on Mesli have rates. They actually have a range of rates because, as we explained earlier, your CV can adjust the rate, as can a few other factors. But they'll give you an indicative range of what they think they can expect based on what's kind of happening in the market at the moment. Okay. So related to this, how to get the most from your agency. So the locums that do well and that have really good years are the ones that have figured out a good relationship with the agencies that they work with. So a few tips on that: sharing your action plan, so being really transparent about what you want, what your non-negotiables are, and being really clear on that. If you won't travel and that's non-negotiable, tell them not to even consider anything that's outside of what you've stated. For example, if you're flexible, tell them you're flexible, and then you're just on the same page as to what you want. That's helpful for them. Then they know what you're looking for. If you're a bit unclear yourself because you haven't thought things through, maybe your plans are a bit vague and you're not sure, that's when potentially there can be, there might be a misunderstanding on some point, for example. Be their favorite locum, basically teacher's pet with them. So they want to work with doctors that are easy to work with, organized. Send them, if they ask for documents, send them promptly. And it's a pain in the ass, but send the stuff they ask for promptly. Be proactive, so contact them, check in with them, be kind of top of their list of doctors that they work with. Be honest and transparent. Sometimes we'll hear stories of agencies trying to play games and do some things with doctors, sneaky things with doctors, and doctors think that gives them the right to behave slightly sneakily in return. I think if you're honest and transparent, that really helps. If you're talking to another agency, tell them that they'd appreciate that. If your plans are going to change, you think you're going to move to Australia, tell them that, again, they'd appreciate that. Ask thoughtful questions. So what we mean by that is, when was the last time you placed a doctor in this hospital? That's a really good question. You've said the rate's 40 to 50. How realistic is 50? Do you think that's possible? Things like that are going to give you a good sense of, a good sense of how likely something is to come to fruition. And lastly, again, this is about confidence more than anything. They work for you. So if you're not getting what you want from the relationship, you can end it, you can fire them, basically, and you can say, look, I'm sorry, but you said you had lots of work in this area and you don't. Let us know about that. That's obviously really useful feedback for us if we've introduced you to that agency. But let them know. And there are other agencies out there. It might be frustrating to sort of start the process again, but I think that's better than just saying, oh well, that's the way it is. I'm going to have to take shifts that I'm not comfortable working in, or whatever. Okay. Brian, do you want to tell some of your stories? The CV library one is my favourite. I think people might like to hear that one. It doesn't paint you in the best light, but
no, it makes me seem a bit of an idiot. So if there's one thing I would say not to do is join CV library. Basically, when I first started, I didn't really know what I was doing. I just went on Google, just like how do I find an agency? Found a guide that says CV library is great. So I signed up with my details. They wanted like my CV and everything. And literally within about half an hour of submitting it, I started getting phone calls after phone call. So within the first day I had 4. And then by the end of the week, I was getting 4 an hour. And it wasn't just agencies calling me. It was like Nigerian princes, billionaires who've lost their fortunes. And I was getting emails about this like constantly. And it was so frustrating. All the agencies, no matter how many times I would say like I'm still looking and so on, would just be quite forceful with their marketing from there. It was a kind of a strange place to be. It got to the point where I basically just kept threatening everyone with like GDPR action, and eventually they did cut down a bit, but to this day I still get random phone calls, and I think it's from that. I actually signed up to one of the agencies from there. I'm not sure if Chris wants me to go into that story just yet, but
it wasn't ideal.
yeah. My first experience with an agency wasn't that great, but later on when I found one through proper means, it was a great experience. But yeah, if there's one thing you shouldn't do, it's join CV library. It's terrible.
Yeah. Okay, a couple of things to close off on agencies, and then we'll move on. Are there any hidden fees? No. We'll talk about payslips in a second and how that works, but no, there shouldn't be any hidden fees. It's always a good question to ask the agency. You've said £45 an hour. That's what I'm going to get paid in my gross pay, correct? And that they should make that clear. That shouldn't be anything hidden. We talked about cooling off periods when you're registering, leaving a bank to an agency. There isn't one the other way around. So if you're working with an agency, it's quite common that the bank might say, hey, come and try and steal you, basically say, hey, leave the agency and come and work with us. That's your choice. The agency won't be very happy if you do that. You might be burning some bridges there, but the bank will be happy. That's your choice. There isn't typically a cooling off period as such. Okay, let's move on. I hope that was helpful. Oh, sorry, there's one more just before we move on about references and DBS. So we've talked a bit about registration. That is the process. It's just almost the same bank and agency. It's basically letting them know who you are, some references, your CV, prove your right to work in the UK. So your visa if you're on a visa, or your passport if you're a citizen, occupational health checks, your serology, and a few forms around that. DBS check, so criminal record check. Like Abra mentioned, we've got a service we call Docs, which helps you learn about all of that and store all of those documents and then share them with the agencies. They all want the same basic documents. So having somewhere to store all of that and share it is quite useful. There are some things that have to be repeated by each agency. They each have to do their own occupational health check, so there's a different form for that. They each, unfortunately, have to ask for their own reference, which is a kind of, unfortunately, just a kind of silly rule that's there. So that can be a little annoying for your referees, frankly. So trying to register with 10 agencies in parallel is not a good idea for many reasons, but that's one of them as well. In terms of getting a reference, we've got, if you look on our blog, there's a bunch of stuff around that, but basically you just give your referees details to the agency or the bank and they contact them. It's a simple form. Did you work with this person? Is there anything, any disciplinary issues? And then they'll write a bit that talks about how great you are. It's always good practice to ask your referee for their permission. At least give them a heads up. It's quite irritating for them if they just get all these letters, emails, and you haven't taken the courtesy to ask. So we definitely recommend doing that. And then DBS, a question about the renewal service called the update service. You only have 30 days after you do a DBS check to get onto this update service. That means that DBS can be used anywhere. If you're not on that, you have to do another one. But most importantly of all, when you do it the second time, then you can get on this update service, and then you can take that anywhere, so you don't have to keep doing them over and over again. So if your last DBS was from F1, which I think is quite common, that's not valid anymore. When you speak to an agency, they'll request a new one for you, and then get on the update service. If you're registering with multiple agencies simultaneously, yeah, they can all ask for a DBS. It's just a lookup of a system and it generates a certificate, so that's fine. But get on the update service, and you'll see a bunch of stuff on our blog. We'll make sure that there's a really good compliance summary that we've written, called a help center, where if you're interested, you can read about all this stuff. We'll make sure that's linked afterwards. Okay, so pay. How will I be paid? What are my rights? Especially rights around pay. This is probably a good point to talk about limited companies or umbrella companies, which are similar. I'd really like to dispel a few myths around this. A lot of people think that limited companies are this kind of magical scheme where they can double their take-home pay and not pay any tax or something like that. And unfortunately, that's not true. I'll just quickly explain. There's two ways of being paid. PAYE, pay as you earn, it's called. That's how you've been paid as a trainee. That's how most workers are paid. And the deductions are taken automatically. So at the moment, you get paid what's called the net. The gross is everything, and the net is after tax, pension, national insurance, etc. has been taken out. That means because you already paid all of that as you earn, as the name suggests, you don't have to do a tax return at the end of the year. Limited company, on the other hand, or an umbrella, you use a company, and that company invoices the hospital, and the company basically gathers the money up, and then sometimes at the end of the year, you then get paid by the company. That means you get paid what's called gross, so without any deductions, which means you have to file tax returns. There is very, very limited scope generally now, but specifically within the NHS, to get paid through a limited company or an umbrella company. You might have heard the phrase IR35 bandied around. That's the name of the legislation that prohibits it. It's very risky, I would say. If agencies are promising you NHS work through a limited company or an umbrella company, I strongly advise you to act with caution there. There are some terrible stories about people being hit with humongous tax bills 3 years later that they can't pay because they've spent all the money. So 99% of the time, you're going to get paid PAYE, where the deductions are taken out before automatically. Limited companies really are for consultants with extensive private practices and advisory roles in different companies, and that designated officer roles, and a whole portfolio of clients that they work with. That's what a limited company is for. If you're locuming in the NHS, that's not appropriate. If it sounds too good to be true, obviously it usually is, unfortunately. Okay. Understanding a locum payslip. I might drag Ryan in here to talk through some of this, because we've just written a really good blog about this, actually, that breaks down all the components of a payslip, what it looks like. See, there's a screenshot there. What it looks like, what bits to pay attention to, and the main things to watch out for, which I've put on the right hand side. Do you want to talk through some of those issues, Ryan, and just give people a heads up of what to expect on the
Yeah,
payslip?
sure. So there's a few things that, I mean, mine is just reading it normally and looking at the obvious, which is like your deductions, your gross pay, and your net pay. There are a few things you should always pay attention to, and one of them is one that for some reason most, especially new locum doctors, aren't fully aware of, is holiday pay. As a locum doctor, you're still entitled to annual leave, but the process of working that out is really complicated. So most locum agencies and banks just pay you for it instead, and that's usually a flat fee. So this needs to come up on your payslip as a separate entry. So it can't just be like you just see one line. So in this particular case, where the amount is paid for your base rate and so on, which would be like 1669, but that the number above it, so the 201, has to be separate. So if it's not, then that's technically illegal, and you can reclaim that money back. So for myself, I think I had about 6 months of work before I realized I was meant to be getting holiday pay. Thankfully, my trust works, I say thankfully, but they work in conjunction with my SBS, which means that they handle the payroll, and I just flagged an online ticket with them, and within about 4 weeks, I had a back pay, which quite a substantial amount in one go. So if you're not getting this,
it's a few percent. So just to clarify on the holiday, you're entitled to holiday, but they don't want to give you holiday, so they basically pay you for that time instead, and it's about 2 or 3% on top of what you already earn. So if you're on, say, £50 an hour, it's an extra £1 an hour at 2%. So it's it's not immaterial. I'm sure that over that 6 months that kind of wrapped up quite a bit, Ryan. That's one thing to watch out for.
Other than this, something that I personally had an issue with when I first started, but this idea of employers' national insurance contribution. So the number you're quoted in terms of your rate at the start. So usually when you speak to an agent or you speak to a bank and they say, like we're going to give you £50 an hour. That normally also, occasionally that will also include the value that the trust would also have to pay as your employer in terms of their contribution. So it's like artificially inflating that rate. At the moment, if I remember correctly, that's about 15.05%. So you can expect, if you're being quoted by the agent, this is the gross pay, or this is your pay, then you can normally expect that would be about 15.05%. So 15.05% taken off.
I'll just clarify that, Ryan. It's not, so employers' national insurance, nothing to do with you. It's something that the trust have to pay separately. So the important thing is just to ask the agency, if they give you an amount, this is what I'm being paid, right? It doesn't include this separate payment that the trust responsible for. It's nothing to do with you. And as Ryan was explaining, sometimes they'll bundle the two together, either out of confusion or just trying to make the number bigger and more enticing for you. And then it's 15%, so it's a lot, and it can be a bit of a shock when your payslip comes. So really, check out the payslip article, which we'll send around afterwards. That it's quite technical, goes into quite a lot of detail. But the most important thing is just to ask, am I getting all of this, or is there some here that's the trust's, called it employer's national insurance payment, and then it should be quite clear.
I find it quite useful when you're negotiating with your locum agent to ask for your values or the rate to be quoted as PAYE, which would normally be excluding the employer national insurance deductions that would be made before it hits your payslip. So if you know your PAYE rate, you don't have to worry about finding that surprise where that percentage gets taken off. So yeah, the other thing is tax code. So 1257L in this particular case is, I guess, a standard one. That's your tax-free allowance there right at the start. But sometimes, especially when you start locuming, because HMLC is quite bad at usually, well, I found them quite difficult to deal with when I was just working as an F2 because they assumed all three of my rotations were different jobs, which caused me a few issues in itself. But when I started locuming, that was fine. But I have heard from friends where they get put into emergency tax codes. This will be explained in far more detail in the actual article that we'll send round. But essentially, this means you don't get any of your tax-free allowance. And if they think you're also working on if you're earning over 50k or over 100k and you get put into a higher band of tax, then this is taken out of your entire pay. So it can cause quite a large number of deductions. So if you think you are being emergency taxed, then you should raise it with HMRC as soon as you can. If not,
it's not a disaster. You get the tax back,
yeah.
right? You just pay a lot up front, more than you should up front. So yeah, the article explains what an emergency tax code looks like. If it ends in an X, for example, that's usually an alarm bell or a W. So yeah, that's also something to look out for. There's some really good questions on here. After locum shift, how long does it take till you get paid? Weekly is common, sometimes fortnightly, occasionally monthly. Some of the banks will only pay you monthly. The agencies will almost always pay you weekly. Something to ask, it's one of those thoughtful questions to ask, how often am I going to get paid? It's a nice perk of locuming that you usually get paid each week. And then, you check your timesheets against that and make sure that everything's in there. But yeah, weekly. There was a question quite near the start that I'll loop back to. Do you still pay off student loan as you locum? Yes, you do. You'll see that it's 9% of everything over 15 grand comes out. Should be a good thing or a bad thing. If you're locuming a lot, you'll pay off your student loan pretty quickly. Take a good chunk out of it at least. And yes, the NHS pension, you can choose to opt in or opt out. It's your personal choice. I think opting in is probably more common because the pension's quite generous. That's just something you choose. You have to tell the agency what your preference is. And just, again, keep an eye if you've opted out and there's a deduction in there. That's something that that you'll have to flag to the agency.
I think it's probably worth mentioning that not every locum agency will give you the option to contribute to NHS pensions.
You should ask. It's actually the trust that decides rather than the agency. So yeah, again, it's all part of the getting to know you process and just understanding how that works. I appreciate this area is quite technical. That's why we've tried to break it down and quite specifically in that article. We're writing something about the NHS pensions at the moment, which hopefully people will find useful as well. So I recommend you check that out. And then, yeah, let us know if you have any further questions, or perhaps it will come around when you actually get your first payslip in August. Okay, rights as a locum. So we've covered a few of these. So just making you aware. Again, this is all written down in more detail on the blog. But you're entitled to unpaid rest breaks. If you end up having to work through and not getting a rest break, when you're doing your timesheets, you should say that. They may or may not choose to pay you for the extra 30 minutes that you worked, but you should certainly ask and maybe make a fuss if they don't. As Ryan explained, you get some holiday pay. You're entitled to sick pay, statutory sick pay. Everyone is entitled to that. It's not a lot. I think it's about £100 a week or a bit less.
Just under.
Just under. when you've been working in a trust for whether bank or agency for a particular period of time, you may get the same sick pay as an employee. That's something, again, to check with the agency and the trust and see what your rights are there. You will have a notice period that will be in your contract. Again, check. That's usually specific to where you're working as well. I think 1 week is typical. If you're on a block booking, obviously, if you're picking up ad hoc shifts, there's no notice period. And then, I mean, this probably goes without saying, but again, I think perhaps people aren't confident enough to call this out. You're entitled to work in safe conditions. I think people think, oh, well, I'm a locum and I'm getting paid loads of money, so I have to suffer working in a ridiculously understaffed department or not having enough senior cover, and that's not true. You're entitled to that. If it's unsafe, you should escalate that in the same way that you would if you're a trainee, speak to the consultants. You can raise it with your agency as well if you're working with an agency, because you should, ultimately it's your GMC reference that's on the line. Doesn't matter how much you're being paid at the time. So speak out and be bold if you think that something's not right. A couple of other questions on pensions before we move on. Will locum work count towards years of service? Yes, it does, I believe, whilst you're continuously paying in. I don't think it matters whether it was a training job or a non-training job or a locum post. If you're working more than one agency, can you contribute via both? I'm not sure, actually. I don't know. I think you can. But I'm not 100% sure on that one. Sorry, I can't be more definitive. But we are doing some particularly thrilling research at the moment into how the pension scheme works, which will have a bit more information about that. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some oversight around pay, limited companies, what a payslip looks like, what your rights are. There's a couple of bits to close on. One around learning, and then appraisals and indemnity, which come up a lot as well. Whilst we're in this topic about learning, I think we'll cover off a couple of the questions that have come in. Some of you guys have been waiting a while about inductions, IT systems, and stuff like that as well. Ryan, do you want to take this one? So, firstly, just give people an insight of day to day what the job is like from a clinical perspective, locum versus trainee, and what the differences are.
Okay. I think from a clinical perspective, it's pretty much the same. There's a couple of different guidelines, obviously, to learn from that differ from trust to trust. Maybe their antibiotics and so on change a little bit, but I think the main difference isn't really clinical. It's more so just, as an F1 and F2, you've kind of built a connection with the people you work around. You get along with the staff, all the supporting healthcare team members. You've got a few friends there as well that you just get along with, and it just helps time go by. Whereas when you first start, especially when you're in a new trust or a new hospital, really for the first time, you can find yourself clock watching a little bit. But after you do a few shifts, maybe after a week or so, that does come back. It becomes a far more relaxing atmosphere to work, and it just becomes a lot nicer. But in terms of the clinical things, like I said, I don't think it really differs that much. It's pretty much the same. The IT systems do though. IT's I don't know why, but it's some places I've worked in have been horrible. It takes maybe like 4 to 5 times longer than another one to just enter someone's details and get them clocked in, and then you do the discharge papers for A&E. So I think that does vary a lot, and that can make the job a little bit more annoying, especially if not very used to it. I think I could probably ask the question about someone. I think someone mentioned, do you get induction and training here as well?
Yeah, let's talk about induction.
Yeah,
what happens on day one.
I think it varies from trust to trust, and also from bank to bank. I've been to a few in Essex where I was given maybe half an hour in fact, the rota coordinator took me around, showed me each department, gave me a locum pack, which had all my IT login details that I'd need for the day. That would last a week, and essentially had all the details I need, what I need to enter, and so on, which was quite helpful. Once I got familiar with that, I went to the department, introduced myself to the consultant, and they essentially kind of did a carbon copy of what it said on the paper and just showed me around. So that was really nice, and that's one of the better hospitals I've worked in terms of having that organization to give you that. A lot of hospitals on the flip side have not. I would find myself chasing for login details and ITs for the IT systems like 2-3 weeks in advance and not getting anything even on the day, having to basically run around the hospital between IT departments and getting signatures to be allowed to essentially have these details, and then getting back to the department. But the consultants are normally always very understanding of this. You're not going to get told off for not having details when it's your first day, especially when you've not been given any. So, and normally they'll ask a member of staff, usually an F2 or an F3, just basically to show you around, tell you what to do, and just give you the lay of the land essentially. So that's quite helpful.
We've got a good article called "Tips for Your First Day," and it's all like basic stuff like make sure you know where to park and things to do to try and help your chances of getting this stuff, how to ask, how to go and find the rota coordinator, introduce yourself, all this kind of thing. There's a question here: if you feel that it's unsafe where you're working because you don't have a IT or proper induction, can you stop working mid-shift? That's your call. Yeah, you're entitled to. As I said, I certainly wouldn't encourage you to just put up with it. If you think it's unsafe, definitely escalate it to the consultant in the first instance, and get them and make them aware, and then see what happens from there. I would say if you're working somewhere that you've never worked before, starting off with day shifts makes massively more sense, as everyone's around during the day. There'll be other doctors there. It's your choice, but I'd probably feel pretty uncomfortable if I was in your shoes, starting off on the night shift when there's not many people around and you might not have had a good induction. Okay. And then getting learning access, learning opportunities, and getting access to training and stuff. Can you talk us through what you managed to do on that, Ryan?
Yeah, so I think as a locum, I think there's quite a lot of myths that you have to sacrifice your learning and your progression in order to get better pay and more flexibility, versus like a clinical fellowship where you have quite a structured training program and teaching options. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. So for myself, yeah, it's a little bit awkward initially when you first start in a new place to ask for like help with sign-offs or teaching. But as you become a lot more familiar, it just gets to the point where especially if you look eager, you're keen, you've told the consultants on the shop floor, if this is A&E, or the registrars, like what you're interested in, what you want to learn, what you're out what you're seeking to do, basically, they can be really helpful. So for myself, I mentioned, earlier I mentioned I was really into surgery, but as the years went by, I started to get more into sports medicine. But anyway, I told the registrars that I was interested in this, and got involved in quite a few audits involving like sport-related injuries, managed to get on a few research projects doing that. I asked basically one of the senior registrars that I was interested in basically learning to suture, get a bit better at that, especially with suturing head wounds, and they just were really amenable. Like I don't think my teaching as a locum doctor, especially after the first month, was any different to F2. I was allowed to join informal sessions, formal sessions as well, providing, it wasn't too busy. If it was really busy, they usually just asked the locums to basically hold the fort whilst the trainees went to teaching. But yeah, realistically, I think I attended almost every single session that they did. So I don't think your learning needs to suffer, and providing you're just documenting this as you go along, it can help with your portfolio and your appraisal, and those audits and those research projects, if I wanted to go into surgery still, would be quite helpful. So I don't think
we'll talk about appraisals in a sec. There's been a few questions on that as well. Just one thing, I think in this situation, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have all the benefits, pay and flexibility, whatever, of locuming, and also learn and feel like you're becoming a better doctor as you go. I think the system maybe tries to hide that from you, and they present this false dichotomy where you either locum or you learn and develop as a doctor, but it's a very binary choice, and that's not true. All of those benefits that Ryan mentioned are available to you if you ask. I think the chances are helped if you're working in the same places regularly, or you're on a long booking, so they're then much more incentivized to train you up, because that particular hospital will get the benefit of it. That's one reason another reason to take long block bookings. But yeah, you can have it all, I think. Okay, appraisals and then indemnity. They're the last couple of things that we'll cover, and then we'll maybe do a sweep through any questions and then let you enjoy the rest of your evenings. So quickly on appraisals, you are supposed to have an appraisal every year. That's in the GMC guidance. The guidance is quite clear. If you're not aware, there's a revalidation process, which is every 5 years. So you'll do one after your 5th year of practice. And the appraisals are necessary to support that revalidation process. So when you go to that meeting, you are supposed to turn up with 5 appraisals. Not everybody does do one. There's a bit of grey area. Some people skip them. Obviously, if you're having an extended time out of practice or you're not doing any clinical work, you won't have an appraisal. That's fine. There's a question at the beginning about that. If you're not doing any locum work, that's fine. You just won't have an appraisal at the end of the year. That won't mean, for example, if you went to Australia for a year, that wouldn't then bar you from becoming a doctor in future. But if you are doing locum work, it makes sense to collect a portfolio and then have an appraisal at the end of the year. So just a few points on that. So the portfolio process is similar to what you've done for your ARCP, or will be doing for your ARCP at the end of F2. All the same constituent parts. We've written a good article on this that explains how to go about that. Use an e-portfolio tool. You can often get an extension on Horus for free. There's a site called Medall that have got quite a good one. That's possible. Collect all that information up, and then at the end of the year, have your appraisal. Some banks, if you're working with the bank, they'll offer you for free, but you have to have done a minimum number of shifts to qualify. Similarly with the agencies, that they might try and charge you 250 to 500 is normal, but that price will come down sometimes to nothing. Again, if you work with them, it's something that you can barter for. And the more the merrier. So have a read through that article and see. Again, it's one thing to just try and get organised with and make sure you're ticking off slowly throughout the year, rather than trying to do it in a big rush. At the end, how can I get an extension on Horus? Do you know, Ryan?
I think if you're working if you're going to be working at the trust that you did your F2 in as a bank worker, then I think normally you just email the rota coordinator and just let them know your plans. I personally didn't do that, but I know a couple of colleagues who did, and they got a year extension.
Yeah, I don't think you have to pay, do you?
No, it's free. No, if you're in the bank, yeah.
If you're in the bank, yeah. Or there's this tool from Medall, and Mestley might be building a free e-portfolio at some point in the future as well. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, let me just check if there's any other questions on the appraisal. Is there a minimum number of clinical hours worked for an appraisal?
Don't think so.
If you wanted to travel, no. I think. What obviously happens in that appraisal is somebody you have a meeting with a consultant that you've worked with, or you present the evidence of what you've learned. I don't think you can come to that meeting with nothing. But maybe the fewer number of hours that you work, the more you have to try and cram in some of that CPD to try and bulk it out. But I don't think there's a number of hours that's a sort of set minimum.
Yeah, I'll just jumping in. I mean, my experience of that is an F3 is that it's quite an informal process, and it's kind of based on who your appraiser is and their discretion around what they require from you. It is less structured than you'll get with your LCP, which is very, very formulaic. My appraisal was with a consultant I knew at one of my old trusts, and it was very specific to me and in my the experience and the work that I'd done. So so I wouldn't worry too much about it. As Chris said, keeping up your portfolio and getting stuff signed off where you can, I think is good practice.
Yeah, great. And do you have to do SLEs, Ryan?
So as part of the CPD, like the CPD element of the continuous professional development of your appraisal, I guess like any learning activities, so mini KEXs, CBDs, and so on would count to them. Any learning events that you can cram in there, they all count towards CPD points. But then there's not a minimum of CPD points you would need anyway. So it's all like down to you. So yeah, you can collect them if you want, but you don't have to. There's other things you can do. You can attend courses, conferences, providing you just show that you're reaching your personal development plan that you set out right at the start of the year, which that's quite useful. So yeah, I mean, you can collect them if you want, but
okay. All right, let's move on to indemnity, which we get asked a lot about. So I'm about to publish something this week, hopefully, which you might find quite interesting on this. What is it? Support and legal protection for what's called medical legal issues. So those are things like a patient complaint or a GMC referral, all that kind of scary stuff that that might happen. And people feel like having, and there's basically a helpline that you can call and a team of people that will talk you through what to do should that circumstance arise, as well as give you like an insurance policy type protection should the worst happen. Now, if you're working in the NHS, it's optional, so you don't have to, but it's mandatory if you're looking to do work outside of the NHS. So I guess for most people, when you're locuming, you'll be locuming in the NHS for all of your time. So in that case, it's optional, but it does give you some peace of mind, especially if, as a locum, you'll be working in variable environments, and you might be working with different team members. That peace of mind can be quite useful. The cost is actually less than you think. If you're doing kind of bog standard F3 locums, you can expect to pay £80 to £150 a year, depending on how much work you're doing and perhaps the specialties that you're working in. It's actually not a lot. I think people think like a car insurance would be hundreds of pounds. This is way less. And we've actually done a special discount with a company called MDD US, who we think are the best, if not one of the best indemnity providers, to get a £50 discount if you register via Messley. So we'll give you a code that you can redeem with them. That makes it potentially half price or even less, which is really cool. We spoke to a bunch of different companies and felt like they were the one that kind of got it the best and be best suited to F3s. So yeah, we'll send a link around about that. You just have to get a code, and then when you sign up or switch to them, you can switch across from someone else to them. They'll apply that discount. Do you have any advice regarding undertaking non-NHS work, such as D4 drivers? So that's a good example. We've publicised some of the opportunities with D4 drivers before. They're very well paid for quite easy work. That's a good example. That's obviously not within the NHS, in which case it's mandatory to have an indemnity. That then forces you to have a conversation with the indemnity provider about what you're going to be doing and what cover you need. And that would be one kind of quite unusual scenario where they would want to know quite a bit about what you're going to be doing and who you're working for, etc. the price would go up for something like that, because that 80 to 150 is, like I said, SHO standard locums. This is obviously something quite different, and in that case you don't have supervision, you're working by yourself. So that's why the D4 drivers and similar things like that are a bit left field. They've got a contact that you can talk to that will advise you on the best policy to take specifically for D4 drivers that will cover that off. So yeah, if you're already talking to them, I'd suggest following up there. That's called D4 drivers. It's letter D, number 4.
Yeah, Delta 4.
Delta 4. We'll let you know when we send emails out regularly when they are hiring. Because we've got quite a good relationship with them. Okay, that's the end of the end of the presentation, the formal part of it at least. I'm just going to run through and answer any questions. Obviously, people can feel free to drop any more questions in about anything, and we'll answer. We'll stay on until we've answered all the questions. Obviously, feel free to drop off if you feel like you've got what you want from this. Quite cool, actually. Almost everyone that was here at the start stayed all the way to the end, which is nice. I was worried that the numbers might dwindle quite quickly, which would be a bit embarrassing.
It's better than my YouTube channel.
Yes. So let's work through some of these questions. How common is overseas work? We work with clinics in New Zealand and Australia quite commonly who are looking to hire F3s. When those come available, we let everybody that's registered with Mestley know. We might put something on social media as well. That's quite common. Those countries, Australia and New Zealand, stopped hiring during the pandemic, mainly because their gaps are caused by the Australian or New Zealand doctors leaving to work abroad themselves, which creates the gaps, and see that all that stopped happening. So they're now hiring. So there's quite a lot of work available in Australia and New Zealand, and we'll let you know if we hear of something.
On that note, if you join the F3 Foundation Year 3 Facebook page, that's where we tend to post a lot of our overseas jobs. So if you join that, then you'll hear basically as soon as we have them. Yeah.
You mentioned contracts earlier. Do you need to sign a skeleton contract even for just a few shifts, or is that for longer locums? So when you join a bank, you sign a contract with the bank, like the T's and C's basically. And that covers you for the work you do there. When you join an agency, you sign T's and C's with the agency. It's part of the registration pack they give you, so you have to read that carefully, and that will cover all of the contracting needs for wherever you end up working. Question here for you, Abra. Can I ask why you chose to do a 6-month fellowship in critical care rather than the long-term locum? Did you find it difficult to negotiate a 6-month post rather than a 12-month one?
Yeah, that's a good question. So going back to the action plan, I really prioritized the sort of learning experience and actually location over sort of pay and the sort of financial benefits. I think the reason for that is that during my foundation program, I didn't do an A&E placement, and I actually was quite interested in anesthetics and critical care, and I didn't get to do that in foundation program either. So I didn't actually feel wholly comfortable managing sick patients. And I also wanted to stay and be in central London. So the clinical fellowship I applied for was on NHS jobs, and it was at some guys at St Thomas's doing 6 months critical care. So it was kind of perfect for me. And I think it sort of stood me in good stead for the applications at Christmas time, because I'd got that critical care and anesthetics experience, and actually it really inspired me to go on and apply for that. And I also knew as well, sort of going back to, the specialties, that there wasn't a huge amount of locum work there, particularly if you haven't got any experience in it. So it was a bit of a no-brainer for me. In terms of negotiating, I didn't have to negotiate anything. It was advertised as a 6-month clinical fellowship post. So it's worth looking on NHS jobs and seeing. It was actually 6 months of critical care and 6 months of cardiology, and I actually ended up leaving the cardiology fellowship a little bit earlier, which because I wasn't having a great time there. So just keep a lookout. If you're looking at the fellowships, it kind of come on around June time. That's a good time to look. And you've got 12 months, so you can really plan out if you want 6 months of fellowship, 6 months of locuming, if you want 12 months of locuming. That's where just sort of being clear on what your intentions are now is really important, and you can kind of see what comes up and whether it fits your requirements.
Yeah, great. One more question, last question, if you have time. Should I wait until my ARCP certificate for my Messley account to activate? No, you don't need that. So the agencies will need it before you can start working, but they'll know it's not ready yet and start coming. And then related to that, can I skip the queue? Yeah, we're going to send, as I explained, there's a sort of batching process for setting your accounts live. We're going to send a queue skip link around after this. So if you're keen to get started and start your search now, speak to some agencies and get moving, you'll be able to do that. And then we'll get you moving from tomorrow or maybe the day after. So just click on the link you'll see in the email. Okay, a couple more. Would you recommend doing a 3-month Monday to Friday block booking in one place, or would it be possible or better to do Monday to Friday ad hoc? That comes down to your personal preferences. I mean, pros and cons. A long block booking, be working with in the same place with the same people every day. Maybe that will help with learning opportunities. There's no issues with IT changing and that sort of thing. Just small stuff. Where you're traveling to every morning. If you're someone that likes certainty and routine, I think you really appreciate that. Doing more ad hoc work gives you more variety, more flexibility. You might learn more from working with different people in different settings. You might get paid more because you can book ad hoc shifts and sort of patch together your own rota. Again, it's down to what you prefer. Obviously, you won't have locumed other than in your own trust before. So, if you want me to sort of take a side, I would say maybe start off doing a block booking, build your confidence maybe, and then once you've got a bit more locum experience, maybe then start looking around for other more ad hoc stuff. Do you have to do mandatory e-learning for all the different trusts? If you register with an agency, you just have to do that e-learning once. You can reuse most of the stuff that you've done in your F1 and F2. They might ask you to fill a few gaps, but mostly mostly not. The compliance information we'll send around afterwards. If you want, you can read about that. It talks about mandatory training and how that works. Couple more. Do you have to start locum in August? No, you can do whatever you like. It's up to you. Some people will have a break for basically take the rest of August and maybe September off, and then come back to it later. Other people will, leave one, finish on a Wednesday or whenever, go straight into the next shift on the following day. It's up to you. And again, it's you're in control, right? You can do, you can do whatever you like. Okay. Are there many ITU locum jobs? No. We'll send the slides around. You'll see it's right at the top there in the uncommon ones. Not that common. I presume they want more stability and certainty over staff. Maybe it's more just a grade thing, and that there's just not that much SHO ITU work.
Yeah, I managed to get a little bit just on bank, just in the trust that I was working. So after
because you'd worked there before,
yeah. But I think same with the agency, there was few and far between. So worth checking with your current trust. But I think for safety reasons, they often just have an internal back pool of SHOs that they use within the department or the bank, rather than going external.
Do you find that certain times of the year have lots of locum posts available, or is it pretty steady? It probably goes up, but it will go up with things like winter pressures. But there's a real abundance of work at the moment if you're looking in those common specialties. So if your plan was to work, for 5 days a week for 52 weeks, just because you want the maximum money, I'd say that was achievable if you're a little bit flexible around specialties or travel. Okay. I think that's it. If anyone's got any other questions, you can drop them in now. Or what we'll do, maybe we'll wrap it up here, and we'll send, as I said, we'll send an email around in the next few minutes, actually, with a bunch of links and further reading if you'd like. We'll have that Q skip in there so that you can get started. If there's anything that comes to mind that you forgot to ask or you didn't want to ask or whatever, just drop us an email, and one of us three or someone else from the Messley team will pick that up and try and answer it for you. We're here to help. We're privileged that you've taken the time to sit with us this evening and that you've registered with Messley. That's what we're here for. We're trying to help. So yeah, look out for that email, and yeah, hopefully speak to you guys soon. Hope you all have a nice evening.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Take care, everyone.
Cheers.
Goodbye.
Bye.